everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 8. Our guest for today is Pastor Elise Anderson Brock, who is the pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is such a cool invite. I feel so scholarly.
Well, it's so scholarly. Well, okay, so I want to say, first of all, Pastor Elise also has a podcast.
Yes.
And so you should go and check that one out too. It's called You're on Mute.
Yes.
Which she does with her mom, who is also a Lutheran pastor. Her dad is also a Lutheran pastor.
Yeah.
And in such a small world that I know both Pastor Elise and the pastor Frank Anderson
That's
from
right.
totally separate reasons. And
I know, it's so wild.
It's so weird.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Every
weird.
time I was like working with your dad professionally, I was like, this is weird. This is Elise's dad.
I know, right? My mom always laughs because, you know, when I first started in ministry and stuff, it was always, oh, that's Elise. She's Mary and Frank's daughter. And then eventually it kind of turned, and my mom would be at events and people would come up to her and say, oh, you're Elise's mom.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my parents were like, oh man, the tide has turned. So yeah, no, both my parents are Lutheran pastors. You'd think I would learn, but I fell right into
here
the
you
same
are, double
trap.
PK.
Here I am.
Yeah, look at that.
Double PK, that's right. You know, my poor sister, she's a nurse, and we're thinking of making her a t-shirt that says PK squared PS1, and then on the back it'll say I'm all churched out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, shout out to Colleen for putting up with all three of us at family gatherings.
Yeah, I
So,
bet. Yeah. What that would look like.
Oh, it's wild. It's wild.
So what's fun for me is like, so no one in my family has like ever worked for a church or even remotely, like that's a zero concept in my family whatsoever. And so like when I go to family gatherings, like I don't like people don't even really like understand. They just I don't know. There's like they can't talk to me anymore. Like they don't know what to say. And I was like,
I know.
It's fine. My personality hasn't changed from the last time that you saw me.
That is such a real thing. Like people, friends of mine who I have known since second grade will like, you know, drop an F-bomb around me or want to talk about the person they're dating. And they're like, am I allowed to? I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to say that or this or that. And I'm like, I am quite literally the same person. Like it's truly okay, you know, or like, oh man, we got to watch ourselves. We got the pastor here with us. And I'm
Right.
like,
And
oh,
you're like,
good God Almighty. I'm like,
and something like the last time that Pastor Elise and I had a beer together was at Jimmy's in
That's
Chicago.
right.
And I want to be clear, like if we're in Chicago again, we're going straight to Jimmy's, right? That's not changing.
That's right. That's not changing at all. Yeah, that was like over 10 years ago, but still.
No, stop pointing out how old we are.
I know. My God, I was thinking about that as I was kind of thinking about today. I was like, oh my God, yeah. Yagam is such a long time ago. Such a crazy time. Us little youngins hanging out at Promontory Point off Lake Michigan. Crazy. So wild.
Children back then.
Absolute children being sent to all corners of the world.
And
but
you know,
yet
here we are, and we made it through, and we decided to stick with the church anyways. And there's a message in there somewhere that I think it's
right.
lost. Sometimes some people are like, "Oh, all the young people left the church," and I was like, "Listen, some of us are still here.
Some of us are still here,
and we're fighting,
and
we're doing cool things.
We're doing these
like
things,
podcasts, and still talking about Jesus."
I know, you know, just kind of like changing, you know, same topic, different atmosphere.
Exactly.
You know, it's okay. I mean, Yagam's the reason I became a pastor, because I actually realized, oh, there are people my age and younger that are still like have full faith in the church and like are doing this thing. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So got back, you know, full membership at a church where I was living, and then only took about a year for me to be like, I think I want to think I want to change my life trajectory completely and go into this whole ministry thing. And God love my parents. They
Yeah,
laughed
I
their
have all
butts
this
off.
education in at like athletic science and stuff like that. I have my other master's degree that
I
you're using
know,
all the time,
exactly.
aren't you?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, let me tell you, that sports medicine, it does come in handy when I make hospital visits because for one thing, the hospital,
Yeah.
it doesn't freak me out. And sometimes I can even kind of translate the doctor speak for my folks. So
Yeah.
it still does come in handy every now and then, but I just wish I wasn't still quite literally paying for that degree while not using it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bummer. But yeah,
I
but
mean,
no.
it's always a part of you. That's
Right? I
that's what I
know. All my old friends from healthcare are like, "You're still an athletic trainer in our eyes." And I'm like,
Mm,
"Cool, haven't wrapped an
thanks. Yeah.
ankle in however long, but love you for it. Love you guys. Appreciate you."
Listen, when
So,
someone goes down to church on Sunday, they know exactly who to call.
I mean, right?
You're ready,
Like,
you're there, you're prepared.
yeah, saving souls, wrapping ankles. I mean, I
That's
can do all the
listen.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got
All those that's really
big
that's saving souls
toolbox.
right there. It is.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
All
totally.
right.
I mean, it's helpful, really is.
All right. We got to Bible.
Bible.
All right.
Bible. That's
Pastor
right.
Elise and I are going to talk about the New Testament reading for Sunday, November 12th, 2023. For those of you who are going to go to church, you're going to hear this. If you're not going to church, great. I'm glad that you're listening to this podcast and you're going to hear it anyways.
Yeah.
Welcome
Yeah.
to our conversation.
Welcome.
So this is First Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 to 18. Guys, I am apologizing. It's one of those weeks where I did some copy and pasting, which means I'm going to read from the New Revised Standard Version that I copied straight from Sundays and Seasons. I've been very good about not doing this lately.
Yeah.
That's where we're at in life. So sometimes
It's a copy and paste time. It's a
yeah,
copy
and
and
you know
paste
what?
time.
It's good. To be honest with you, I've been doing a lot of the New Revised Standard Version updated edition. And there's not a lot of differences, right? Which is
shocking.
Yeah.
Absolutely shocking.
Yeah, they didn't make a whole lot of updates, but I do appreciate their diligence in like going through and like deciding, hey, there are a couple of things that like maybe could have a different word would have been, I think, translated better into modern English.
Yeah.
Which I think is helpful. So this is, can I say, so Pastor Kevin Baker. He posted something a little while ago, and it's still like, it's a thing that like I think about every day still, where it's this thing he says, in 2,000 years in a different language, no one's gonna know the difference between a booty call and a butt dial.
Yes. Okay.
Because they're the same words, right?
It's like the same words. I used that example in confirmation the other day, and then I realized how old I was because they all went, "What's a butt dial?" And then they're like, "What's a booty call?" And I was like, "Oh no, I am not explaining booty call to this group of preteens."
Pretend Pastor Elise
I was like, rewind it, reverse. We're gonna throw this.
That like
really
it's
quick.
so true though. Think about so this is the thing when we read biblical text, right? So we're trying to figure out those nuances and those meanings that like if someone were to wrote that, something like that into here, like would we necessarily understand the difference, right? Of those different things? And I think that that's a huge thing. Honestly, especially I think when we read Paul, because Paul uses a lot of like slang and other things like that. And those get translated very, very poorly because we don't actually know what they mean. So like people are trying to make choices, editorial things, but we don't know like the language for booty call in first century, right? Like, and so like this is hard for us to totally understand some of those things. And so
and Paul was writing to so many different communities and trying to like be applicable to all of their situations. And so he was probably just like going for Urban Dictionary Macedonia.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, okay, what'll this mean to these people? How can I reach them? So yeah, I mean, Paul really had quite a task ahead of him. And so, I love doing that. I love contextualizing the scripture. I think it really helps us just kind of look at it differently.
Another thing with Paul that I always also like to make sure that we understand too is that, like, so the things that we have from Paul are letters to very specific people.
Yes.
And so when we read them now, 2,000 years later, and we try to work with them, I think we try to apply them, quote, as rules and laws, which is not what
Right.
they're meant for.
No.
But to remember that, like, we're reading someone else's mail.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing when we dive into First Thessalonians here. We're reading someone else's mail.
Reading someone else's mail without ever seeing what prompted said mail.
Exactly.
So, like, we're only seeing one side of the conversation.
Yeah,
you
I've
know?
said that
I mean,
before too.
yeah.
There's whatever letter where the two women, it's not Romans, is it? Where Euodia and someone else are arguing, and he was
Oh
like,
yeah, it was
I'd
in
like
the
them
last.
to be in like the same line, blah blah blah. And I was like,
Yeah.
what letter got sent to him where someone was like, listen, these bitches won't quit fighting, and we're having some real big trouble. And so he writes this
Right?
really like, right? I want to hear
Yeah.
that side of the
And
story.
it was
That's what we
probably
don't
like
know.
probably like the council president who was
Yeah.
just really, really pissed about what these two lady pastors were doing, and he was like, "Come get your girls because they will not stop fighting over if the
That's what it feels like, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly what it is when like some council president is mad at their pastors, and so they're like,
Right.
"Oh, I'm gonna write the
So they
bishop
write
a
the
letter
bishop
and tattle on you."
Yeah. And then the bishop's response gets put into a holy scripture.
Yeah.
2,000 years later, like, shit, man, like we're in trouble.
Could you imagine what that would feel like if you like
Oh my
if Paul
gosh.
is looking down, I think, on how the Christian church has chosen to use his letters? Can you just like hear him being like, listen, I like wrote that in the middle of the night. Like I was sleeping in a tent. Like this was not meant to be taken that seriously, right? Like I
Or
just
like,
needed.
I hadn't eaten in a week. I was in a
Yeah.
prison cell. Or like,
Yeah, like,
that was Timothy. That was not me.
Right, yeah. I never said that.
I never said that. This is triangulation at its best. Get out of here. I never said that. But yeah, I know. I mean, it's so wild, you know, how we've just taken these things and have just been like, this is the word of God. And it's like,
yeah, I think it, you know, so
but like, let's not get too crazy.
Elise knows because she's lived here before, but I have recently moved into the Bible Belt.
Welcome.
Because both your parents are still in South Carolina, so
they are, and I'm in southeastern Tennessee, girl. I am in the buckle of this belt. Trust.
Listen, and so when you like sit in this, and like sometimes when people are like quoting scripture and stuff, I'm like, what? Do you even know what that means? Like, yeah. I don't think that means what you think it means.
Yeah. It's like Inigo Montoya, right? That does not mean what you think it means.
That does not mean what you think it means.
Yeah, no, I have those moments too. And, you know, it's amazing to me how memorization over understanding has been so like hammered into people. So they're like, well,
that makes you a better Christian because you have it memorized.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I'm sitting up in the pulpit literally going, I should have looked this up when I was writing my sermon. But you know, that one time when Jesus says something like this, it might have been in John, might have been a lot. And people are looking at me like, how do you not just know that? And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm a human being and not a robot. So like, it's just so crazy.
It's like, that's not where my gifts are. It's not where I put
it's not my spiritual gift. Memorization of scripture. I'd like to understand it. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's so
I still have the quadratic formula memorized, but I'm
and like,
not sure if I actually know how to use it.
Why? I need
like, why do I need that? Like,
why do I need that? I have that, but I have to hire someone to do my taxes. Like, come on.
Like,
come on.
Actually, clergy taxes might be harder to do.
They are horrific. They are horrific. Oh my gosh. Yes, 100%.
Let us digress into First Thessalonians. So so like we said, we're reading someone's mail. So I'm gonna read the passage. And then we'll talk about a little bit of background on First Thessalonians, and then like why Paul wrote this letter to them, because I think that's important for us to understand.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
All right. So First Thessalonians 4:13-18. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Also, love the dramatic reading.
That's how I always read the Bible. Like, that's how I read
Right?
it on Sunday mornings. I give Jesus a voice. I give other people voices. It's
As you
this kind of-
should.
oh my
As
God.
you
Yesterday was
should.
like so much fun because of how murdery Jesus was. I was like, oh, this is a great one.
So murdery.
Yeah.
I reread. So like we've been doing the alternate first lesson this whole summer because it's like kind of continuous, and so it's like, you know, the story from Genesis through Exodus or whatever. And so there was this one Sunday where they talk about, it's the passage of Moses and the Israelites passing through the Red Sea. And God love it, all of my lectors who I adore like read it like, and then Moses rose his staff and the Red Sea parted and a great wind. And I was just like, hello, the Bible's not boring. So I reread that passage for the children's message and like was so ultra dramatic. And at one of the services, this little girl at the end was like, yeah,
clapping.
yeah, she was like, that was so great. And I was like, you know,
That's
Bible's
such
not
a great
boring.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so funny. It was really
I mean,
kind of
listen, a lot of these things, a lot of them are stories, right? Like, how do you read stories? I don't know why.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot on Sunday mornings. People are reading the Bible like a legal document. And I'm like, this is not.
Exactly. I'm just like, oh my God. I do
Because
have
also when
some,
you read it like that, no one's listening. And if no one's listening,
no
why
one.
are you reading them scripture? It doesn't even make sense.
Right, exactly.
Let's
I
give it a
know.
little oomph. Also,
Yeah.
I like to give the tone of it, right? So this is a pastoral letter, right? So a tiny bit about what's happening is, first of all, most scholars believe that this is an authentic Pauline epistle, which means we do believe that Paul actually wrote it. We agree on that because there's a lot of them that are attributed to Paul that people don't.
Yep.
And yes, it's also one of his first letters, potentially his first. There's some argument if Galatians or First Thessalonians come first. I think most Lutheran scholars come down on the side that this one did come first because it doesn't have some of like those key points where Paul's really starting to lay out a theology, which I'm not a great scholar, so like I'll take their word for it. My more thing is I was like, that just doesn't seem to be like the tone of the letter. Like he's not actually talking to them about justification, any of that. This is a pastoral letter that I can only imagine someone wrote to him and was like, listen, you know, we're all in on this Jesus guy, but like people are dying, and what does that mean for us?
Right,
and they're still trying to figure it out. Like they don't have a theology of the afterlife yet. They haven't figured that out because they, you know, they're mostly probably converted Gentiles, so meaning they would have believed in the Greco-Roman gods, right? So like he's telling them, you know, Hades isn't really how it works. Okay, so now they're trying to get a new idea in their mindset. So then where do we go? Yeah, so where do we go? When does that happen? I'm very confused. Another really important thing to understand is that like they think Jesus is coming back like tomorrow.
Like right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
They're ready for it. Like they're still in that prep mode where like it's any day now Jesus is coming back.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite moments in Acts is that ascension story where they all just kind of stand there and like watch the bottom of Jesus's feet float into the sky. And they're all just like, all right, he's just going to like tag God's hand and come back. Right. Like,
like how long are we supposed to wait here?
Yeah. This is like a shuttle run in elementary school gym class, right? Like he's just going to come back. And the angels are like, hoo-hoo, hello. Like,
you got work to do down there.
You got work to do, guys. Yeah. So yeah, they're just constantly like, it's cool. He's coming back. It's cool.
Yeah.
Any moment now.
So that's an important, I think, piece to understanding a lot of the relationships that Paul would have had with these churches in starting them and what he is. So like he's really in this mindset right now that like we're converting as many people as possible because Jesus is going to come back and that's when the rapture is going to happen. Right. So that's like sort of Paul's mindset. And so the fear that's happening here and the thing that they haven't figured out or like haven't really put theology to yet is, well, what about the people who have died before Jesus comes back? Are they still going to Hades? Are they not, they don't get to go because they weren't alive?
Yeah. Is it just like the biggest FOMO moment on the planet?
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Oh, darn, I got martyred too soon.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, that's the big fear.
Yeah.
You know what? I think to me, in sort of our 21st century is sort of understanding theology around death, resurrection, heaven, blah, 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 the eschatology stuff is the exact opposite of that.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like we now...
White American Christians are one of the most privileged people on this planet. Like, persecution is not something we truly understand, but these folks in, like, Thessalonia are getting just slaughtered for their beliefs. And so the fear is real.
Yeah.
Like, they are truly just like, hey man, like you said earlier, we bought into this thing, we're all over it. Okay, but like half my family just got crucified and I'm in a cave hiding. What's going to happen to them and what's going to happen to me? Because like you haven't talked about this part yet.
So another thing, so that helpful thing of like, you haven't talked about this part yet, is they're like solely relying on Paul to tell them what's up. They don't have, the Gospels haven't been written yet. Those don't exist. Like, they don't have copies of Jesus's story. They just have like word of mouth stories that people are telling. And all of their theology is either coming from Paul or Timothy or Silas, usually, of them telling like, yeah, this is our understanding of what happened.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, well, what should our understanding be now? And I think in Paul's case, because, I think you're dead on, it's a very, you can always tell when it's more of a pastoral letter from Paul, because his three favorite things to talk about are faith, hope, and love. I mean, it comes up constantly. And so he mentions faith, hope, and love all throughout this letter. And, I think in a lot of ways, Paul is also holding on to this hope that Jesus is going to come back and say, all right, so I was telling you guys how to kind of live here and now. Now I'm going to tell you what happens after. But Jesus doesn't come back immediately. So Paul's just kind of like, all I know is it's going to be okay. So like, keep going.
And I think that's the difference between like early Paul letters and later Paul letters, is because in the early Paul letters, like this one, like it is a pastoral letter of just like, I understand that you're going through a lot right now. Hold on, give each other some hope. Like, Jesus is coming soon and everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And then the later Pauline letters, he's really writing out like full doctrines of like, this is what the thing is, like kind of like, I don't want to say he's given up hope that he's going to see Jesus again in this lifetime, but like, he's certainly setting, I think, those churches up in a way of understanding that they're going to have to carry on without him.
Yeah. I mean, I think he realizes that, he is now the earthly leader of this church. He is now kind of who people are looking to. And like, could that have, swelled his head a little bit? Of course. Like, who wouldn't, kind of be like, oh yeah, like I'm the main person now. Because, in these first letters, he's still clearly such a just devoted disciple. Yeah. And he's like still that kind of green stick first call pastor, like, everything's gonna be fine and it's cool. Fine, and then he gets imprisoned a few times and he lives through a lot of like church conflict and drama, and he's just like, okay, people, like
a battered aged pastor that's in their 50s now, and they're just like, I don't have time for your drama.
I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this email. I'm just gonna like, whatever, it's gonna be fine. And they're just, I think, and then he just kind of, like you said, he realizes, okay, I've got to kind of step my game up, kind of enough with the gospel side of things. We need to lay down some law as well too. And so yeah, it's really interesting to kind of see his shift, but and like, I would love to probably dive into Paul a little bit more. And we have a really phenomenal Paul professor at LSTC, Barbara Rossing. I'd love to pick her brain about like, how do we see his tone shift between like imprisonments, right? So
like, that sounds like that would be a great podcast episode for we're on mute.
Right? Bring on Barb Rossing. Yeah. Man, that would be a long
We'll put Pastor Mary on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, Mom, note to self, call Barb Rossing.
Yeah. See if she'll see if she'll say yes. Yeah. And another, I agree. I would love to hear what, like, if we can date out what those transitions are like. I believe it.
It'd be so rad to kind of
Yeah.
see, because it, like you said, I mean, the context is so huge, and we
Hmm.
also, like, we don't know, he could have written thousands of other letters that we've just never even seen.
Oh, lots of it. Yeah,
You
yeah,
had,
for
I mean,
sure.
right? Like, he
These
has
are
to,
just
and
ones we still have copies of, right? Like that's really what it came
exactly.
down to. And like some of them are like molded together of like
Mm-hmm.
this was like kind of part of a one letter, part of a two letter, and they just kind of like put them together and then called it,
Yeah.
so
Because let's be real, like, piecing together scripture is like how they made dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. It's like
yeah.
we take what we have, but we have these, these strips that literally, quite literally, had holes in them, and areas that were faded. So we just kind of like have copied and pasted certain things together.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
That's a
he
great
said
way of
that.
putting it because that's very,
Yeah,
very true.
yeah.
Um,
I love a Jurassic Park reference. I will
well, that
always.
also, so like that would talk about like if you want to talk about the documentary hypothesis and get into
Yeah.
that, but like that's probably a separate topic. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, so with this though, so the thing I think that Pastor Elise and I are trying to point out is like this is a pastoral letter, that this is a community
Mm-hmm.
that's in a lot of pain. And so
Yep.
this is Paul's response to them, for them to, to hear that they are they're still in the club. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yep.
calm down. But the way that this has then been taken and used is it has been used to justify the sort of like rapture theology that we have,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in American evangelicalism.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it stems way beyond them. Like, I think you could pick the pews of any even Lutheran church, and you're going to get some of this quote I like to call common theology. And I use
Mm-hmm.
this term that just means this is what I call theological concepts that have permeated into society, but are not necessarily from any particular denomination, but seem to
Yeah.
be something that somewhere, some along the lanes took hold, even if it's not a thing that like we believe, right, for real.
Right. Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
I think that the common theology and the thing that you're going to hear always is that we hear you die and you instantly go to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep. Boop.
This is the thing that, so here's the really challenging thing that I'm going to say, just lay it out there, take a moment. That is not actually Lutheran theology.
Mind blown.
We don't actually believe that when you die, you instantly go to heaven. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we also don't believe in this like purgatory situation. So I'm not about to head to there. Like that's
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Martin Luther called it the great sleep, so that everyone
Mm-hmm.
who has died before the second coming is sleeping. You're in it's a peaceful sleep.
Yeah.
We all actually go to heaven together at the end,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is, so I do like to have hard conversations with people in theology, but I am going to admit
Mm-hmm.
this is one I never ever bring up or try to correct people.
Oh no, this is not like a point you need to make as you're, praying with a family before you go out into a funeral.
Exactly.
This is like a great,
Exactly.
like a great like Bible study topic, right? We talk about how Paul's doing this pastoral letter. This is not something you would write in a pastoral letter. It's something you would write, in a newsletter article about like, did you know? Or, a Bible study or confirmation or something like that, which also falls into Luther's view on death. He was very much about like, think about it now.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it before it's on your doorstep, so that it is not so scary and agonizing when it comes.
Yeah.
Like, he was very much, he was kind of a dark and sassy dude, right?
He
So
was
he was like
very dark.
very dark. He's
Very,
like,
very, very dark.
think about death, think about sin, think about, agony now, so that when you get to death, it's actually this like blessed relief,
Yeah.
and you can focus on the glory of it. And, he compared it, I was rereading, I loved this because I felt like I was back in seminary, like actually really diving into things and not just like trying to write a sermon at 11:30 on a Saturday night.
First of all,
And
I really,
so,
really greatly appreciate it, because I do have
yeah.
guests that like it's very clear that they put zero thought into this, and I was like, that's not what my hope was. My hope was for us to have an
Oh
intellectual
no,
conversation.
I dove in, man. I've got like my
Great.
Bible on the left, I've got like my notes here on the right. And so I was reading Luther's sermon on preparing to die that he wrote in 1519, and he compares death actually to birth. He talks about,
yeah.
he talks about how like death is this short but narrow road from like the womb of the world, because he always talks about our current life, our earthly world is far too narrow for God, but it's like seems really vast to us. And then death
Mhm.
is this like short but narrow path into this like vast expanse that is heaven or the afterlife, and being in God's presence. And
Yeah.
so he's just kind of like, it's kind of like a baby moving from a woman's womb out into the world. It's really
Hmm.
scary and it's really painful. And he's like, but then once it's over and the pain is gone, we're like, oh, this baby's pretty great. And like, look at how joyful this is and new life and all that kind of thing. And so he really, for a male theologian in the 1500s, he really uses this birth analogy kind of well.
Hmm.
But he did have 6 living children, so I guess he was, had witnessed that quite a few times. But yeah, he says we should familiarize ourselves with death during our lifetime, inviting death into our presence when it is still at a distance and not on the move,
Hmm.
which I thought was pretty cool. And
Well, do you know what that actually
yeah.
tells me? Maybe we should be talking about it more as pastors. And
Yeah.
I only say that it's sort of like, because again, like I don't usually talk about it because like
Mhm.
it only comes up when like people are dying, and then you're not going to tell their loved ones like, well, actually, Martin Luther says,
Yeah.
because like, that's a terrible thing to do. I mean, there's just
Yeah.
like things that you shouldn't do, because always 100%, I truly believe that care
Mm,
comes before your theological opinion, always.
totally. Yeah.
And so maybe if we did better of like, you're right, having more Bible studies about like, hey, let's talk about some of these things,
Yeah,
then maybe you're
totally.
right. When we get there, it does look a lot less scary and a lot
Scary.
less like we need to say those comforting things because it's so scary, but
Yeah.
rather we see it as more of that celebration and that rebirth.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, I've in just my short time in ministry, or what it feels long, but it's really in the grand scheme of things pretty short, have seen quite a few people like on their deathbeds, or have sat with family as folks really aren't with it anymore. And I've never seen anyone truly at peace, but I did until one of my most recent funerals that I had to do was for a member of mine, and he was in his 80s, like his brain cancer had come back and it was really, really bad. So he knew, his time was coming to an end. And he was the first person I've ever actually sat with. At the time, I didn't know this, but when we sat down and had this conversation, it was like 2 weeks before he died. And he was so at peace
Hmm.
because he had thought about this and he had prayed about it and asked Jesus to like walk with him. He said, I've never felt Jesus's presence more than I do right now.
Hmm.
And he was like, I truly believe Jesus is sitting here with us as we have this conversation. And I had come there because he grew up Catholic, so he kind of wanted last rites, or whatever the Lutheran version of that
Yeah.
is, the commendation of the dying. So I did that with him and we had communion. And then we had this like really beautiful theological discussion about death. And
Hmm.
he was just so with it. And it reminded me, I have another Luther quote because I wrote it down. But he said, you must look at death while you are alive and see sin in the light of grace and hell in the light of heaven.
Hmm.
And like when I read that quote today, I thought
In the light
that's
of grace and
that's
heaven.
where
Wow.
that's where Lou was. Like
Wow.
Lou was sitting there staring death in the face and saying, I'm not scared of you.
Yeah.
I'm not scared of you because I know what's coming, and I know, I'm at peace with what I did in my life, and like here we are. And so it's just kind of
Well, I
feels
think that's
dark, but
the
it
key right
leads
there
to
too. No,
places.
that having that peace of your life when you get to the end of your life and you look back and you
Mhm.
go, yeah, I did the things I wanted to. I lived the life that,
Mhm.
there's, I think maybe that's the key and the goal there is
Right?
to strive to be in that place.
Yeah, live right so you can die right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was like, Luther's whole thing in this sermon of his that I read, which was very long. It took me like 45 minutes just to read it, so I can't even imagine how long it took him to preach it. But he really did just kind of say like, you know, come to peace with things now, like, and then it'll be much easier down the road. And I think even Paul in his own way is saying that, because right before he talks about all of that, he's giving them advice on how to live faithful lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he's kind of, I think, trying to urge them in that direction as well, of like, this whole rapture thing, which we've now made so scary, right? And kind of our call it like social media theology of like, don't want to be left behind, blah, blah, blah.
I think you named it. I think that series.
Yeah.
I did a lot of,
So much
I read it.
Yeah. It's terrifying. It's especially terrifying if you are in any way different than what mainstream tells you is normal. But granted, yes, the word Paul uses means to snatch away. And when we hear of somebody being like snatched, it's not in the like Urban Dictionary version of like, oh, you look snatched from head to toe, you're looking good. No, it is you are snatched. You are snatched.
No, didn't we talk about that? He could have said booty call. He could have called them.
He could have said like, you are going to get snatched. Like you are going to look so good. And they were like, oh my God, snatched. We're going to be kidnapped. And it's like, no, that's actually not.
That's probably it. That's the total problem right there. That's what we've done completely
oh my God.
off in our whole theology of Paul.
We solved it here and now. Everybody share this podcast because we just figured out the whole thing. But yeah, it's like, it's, and he doesn't talk really about anybody necessarily being left behind. He says we will all be swept up in this glory of God. And I love the image of like meeting God in the air. We're all just kind of like floating there like we're skydiving. And it could also be, somewhere totally different. But I even admitted in a funeral sermon recently, I said, we don't know what happens.
Yeah.
We don't. We live in hope, and we take kind of what we're given, and we think about it and we process it. But because we are a resurrection people, because we live with that faith, hope, and love that Paul always talks about, we can live in the comfort that it's going to be okay. Whatever it is, it's going to be okay.
And I think that's exactly what Paul was telling them.
Right?
Like that's the beauty in the pastoral message, but it also is faithful. And I like to remind, part of our theology too is remembering like you are saved. Jesus did that. Our job, we're not earning it. Our job is to live in response to this gift, right?
Yes.
And so part of that is then how do we live in response to this gift? And hopefully in a way that when we get to this scary point, it's not scary anymore, right?
Right.
We can be like Lou and we look back and be like, I'm at peace with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we might not all get that gift of kind of a countdown, right? Like it might happen suddenly, but that's, I think, the reminder of like, don't wait. Everyone says like, don't wait to, tick items off your bucket list until you're retired because you could have a heart attack the day after you leave your job.
Yeah.
But, even though that's kind of like, platitude theology, at the same time, there's something to it. It's like, if we find something every day, if we live faithfully as much as we can and believe in the grace we receive when we don't live so faithfully, then even if death comes suddenly, at least the people we leave behind can say, she did it. Like she was doing it. She was doing it. And, it was, it that also takes the sting away from not just for us, those of us leaving, but for those people who are still alive and grieving us, to know that, if we are living that way and if the people around us are living in those ways, then they also have the peace that they need to kind of press on after they get through the initial shock and grief and things like that. So, there's a lesson in all of it, whether we are the ones experiencing that passage of death or whether we are walking alongside people experiencing that passage. There's something in it for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And just that is that like there's comfort in that promise. And that's
absolutely
what it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Faith doesn't have to be scary, and neither does the rapture. Was never meant to be scary.
Listen, this is
always meant to be.
I hope that I am not around for the rapture. I hope that I have lived my life to its fullest and that I am in this deep sleep when Jesus comes back, because, it does sound a little scary.
It does sound a little scary, and I think, Paul might even be looking down like, ooh, I didn't really mean it that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
No, I think there's a lot of things that we do that I'm sure Paul's like, guys, you got this one backwards.
Yeah. Ooh,
Anyway.
yikes.
Well, thank you, Pastor Elise, so much for joining us in this conversation today. This is hard stuff, and we've only scratched the surface. So I hope all of you out there that do use this Bible study use this podcast for your Bible study stuff, I hope that this just sparks some more conversations around some of these harder topics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As always, you can learn more at 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10footpole podcast and wherever you listen to podcasts. And the 10 Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Woo!